take your seats. Good evening and welcome to our annual town hall meeting. My name is Marianne Vinieres. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for International Trade and Transportation, and I'm also Director of Transportation Program for the Cal State Long Beach Foundation. It is, as every year, wonderful to see so many familiar faces in the audience. In fact, during the reception, I talked to a few people who said they have been here every single time the event happened, and this has been 5 times now. And I have to tell you that it is really assuring for us at the Policy and Steering Committee to see that you value what we have to present to you. Now, I do hear a little echo with the microphone. Is it okay out there? It is? Okay. I meant talking about the Policy and Steering Committee that is putting together this event. It is my pleasure to introduce to you the chair of the Policy and Steering Committee, Dr. Dean Crago, Dean of the University College and Extension Services. Would you stand up to be recognized, please? And with that, I would also like to introduce my other boss, Dr. Beam. Is he still here? Dr. Beam, who is the Executive Director of the Foundation. And Dr. Beam was the chair of the Policy and Steering Committee for about 4 years. Since we are introducing people, I believe it's only appropriate that I ask the member of the Policy and Steering Committee to please stand up so we can recognize you as well. Would you please stand up? Thank you. Thank you. The main purpose of our annual town hall meetings is to present and discuss the state of the trade and transportation industry in the spirit of education. One of CITT's primary functions is to provide a neutral forum where all the parties in the logistics industry and its community stakeholders can come together and address the issues and bring about solutions. Today's focus, as the title indicates, will be on quality of life and port operation. And this is certainly a topic that has been very popular with local and national press recently. We have read about the region's population growth along with an increasing demand for inputs. We certainly have our share of articles on the complexities of pollution problems and congestion in our region. But there are always some questions that do not come out in the press, and therefore I am very pleased to present to you a very impressive and esteemed group of panelists who will respond to your questions tonight. In our program booklet that you hopefully picked up, you will find the agenda among other important information. The committee structured the event in such a way that we do allow for a lot of questions, as it should be for a town hall meeting. With this in mind, we do keep the introductions of our speakers intentionally brief. We ask you, however, to refer back to the booklet and read the bios of our guests here tonight. At this time, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our provost, the provost of the California State University, Long Beach, Dr. Gary Richard. Please welcome Mr. Richard.
Thank you, Marianne, and good evening, ladies, gentlemen, friends. We are greatly honored here at Cal State Long Beach to host this occasion, and I bring you greetings and good wishes from President Robert Maxson and from the faculty, staff, and students of our university. It's hard to believe this is already the 6th of the town hall meetings. I can well remember discussion of the first such town hall when it was being planned, and everyone was a little bit concerned about how it all might turn out, and of course it continues to turn out extremely well. I can think of really no greater involvement we can have as a university in support of our region, our local community, our state, its economic well-being and its future than to host the civil and thoughtful discourse that always marks these occasions on the most important of issues, and always on issues where there are very strongly held points of view. We must, however, engage those issues. There's no better place, I think, than in the venue of a university. Of course, our foremost responsibility here at the university is to provide formal education for students who come here to earn degrees. Another very important responsibility is to engage in the kind of research and creative activity that furthers the knowledge base from which we all work. But in the California State University, of which, of course, this campus is one constituent campus, it's an equally important commitment to serve our community, our region, and our state. And we are honored by your presence here tonight and by your coming to our campus to talk about an issue than which it's harder to imagine a more important one. The environment we live in, and how that intersects with one of the most vital economic activities in the nation, not to say our own region. And as one wise soul with whom I was speaking said this evening, we have no choice. The community needs the ports need the community, we all need a safe environment and a clean environment, and however we may differ, whatever perspectives we may bring to the conversation, we absolutely just have to come up with solutions. So this kind of discourse is the beginning of solutions, and we are absolutely delighted to be part of this. I wish for all of you a profitable and successful evening, and that the conversation shall continue to the solutions after this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Richard. At this time, it is my great pleasure to recognize some of the dignitaries that are here with us tonight. So as I call your name, would you please stand up, and I'm asking the audience to please hold your applause until I read all the names. So let me begin by recognizing Assembly Member Alan Lowenthal, Vice Mayor Frank Colonna, City of Long Beach, Council Member Bonnie Lowenthal, City of Long Beach, Council Member Tanya Reyes Oranga, City of Long Beach, Council Member Val Lurch, City of Long Beach, Council Member Larry Forrester, City of Signal Hills, Matt Canabi for Supervisor Canabi, Bill Crady, Office of Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, Chad Molnar, Office of Congresswoman Jane Harmon, Amelia Wang, Office of Congresswoman Grace Napolitano, Trevor Daley, Office of Senator Dianne Feinstein, Wendy Wong, Office of Mayor Han, City of Los Angeles, Jim Hankela, Harbor Commissioner of the Port of Long Beach, Doris Topsy-Elwood, Commissioner of the Port of Long Beach, Carmela Townsend Kokol, Harbor Commissioner of the Port of LA, Tom Warren, Harbor Commissioner of the Port of LA, Captain Peter Neffinger, Captain of the Port with the United States Coast Guard, Joe Donato, President of the ILWU Local 13. Joe may be a little bit late. I was asked. He's still at a meeting. Joe Gasperos, the President of Local 63. And then we have George Hilbert, President of Local 94. And I believe, last but certainly not least, we have Richard Walker here from Merritt, who came all the way down here from Washington. So ladies and gentlemen, please recognize these dignitaries with a round of applause. And I do apologize if I have forgotten someone. I would like now, for a brief moment, recognize our students who came here today. I do know that we have some global logistics specialist student here. We also have some students from our certified logistics class here, global logistics class, and some of our master students. We have a number of students from USC and from here from campus. So please stand up, and we would like to recognize your interest in transportation. Would you please stand up? Before we get started with tonight's program, I want to bring to your attention two things. The first one is that tonight's proceedings are going to be webcasted, and the webcast is archived on the internet for 1 year, at least for 1 year. This gives people who were not able to come an opportunity to see the proceedings, and it gives you another opportunity to go back and learn about this event. The website where you can see the webcast is listed on the bottom of your agenda in your program. The other item that I would like to bring to your attention is the fact that we would like to have feedback from you. In your program, you will find this evaluation form, and I do ask you to start filling out the form and let you know that your comments and your assessment is very important to us. In fact, it is so important, we would like to have your comments back so much that if you return your filled out form, we're going to give you a voucher of the dirt bags in exchange for your form. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with our teams here on campus, the Long Beach basketball team is known as the Dirtbags, and they are currently ranking number 7 in the nation. Baseball, sorry, baseball. It tells you where I'm at. Baseball. The voucher is good for 1 ticket at the player field, and the game that you're going to see is Cal State Long Beach versus UC Irvine. Okay. Now with this, I think we are ready, and it gives me great pleasure to ask to the lectern Dr. Genevieve Giuliano, who is the professor of the School of Policy Planning and Development at USC, and Dr. Giuliani is also the director of the MedTrans Transportation Center, which is the key funding source for this event. She's going to talk to you about the purpose of tonight's town hall meeting. So please welcome Dr. Giuliani.
Thank you very much, Marianne. There was one more order of housekeeping that Marianne forgot, so I'll bring it up. And that is, for those of you with cell phones, please make sure they're off for the next hour and a half. Thank you very much. Marianne already began introducing the town hall. She used the magic words of neutral forum, which is the basis of what we do here. And she mentioned words about solutions, and she mentioned words about port-related problems. She also mentioned that this is now year number 6 of Town Hall, and that it's been one of the programs that MedTrans has funded, the MedTrans Transportation Center, with great pleasure and satisfaction, I might add. The town halls have evolved over these 6 years. The early forums were really rather focused on bringing labor and management together, and they dealt with issues that I would describe as port operations. Over the years, the town hall has expanded to bringing in all industry stakeholders and eventually to engaging the wider community of interest related to ports and international trade. Nevertheless, the purpose of the town hall remains exactly the same: to provide a neutral forum for collaborative problem solving that is informed by facts, not by opinions or perceptions. Tonight's topic, quality of life, and panel are the broadest yet, representing not only ports and industry, but the wider community of the region, policymakers, and the environmental community. As you know, we could not have chosen a more timely topic. Those of you who read the LA Times know that the NRDC report came out on Sunday and graded the ports C and C+, if memory serves me, respectively. My job really here is to introduce the video at this point. We're going to begin with a video that will introduce the basic problem. That is the many economic benefits and the environmental costs of a large and growing international trade sector in Southern California. As we cue up the video, let me tell you a bit about it. You're going to see that growth in international trade is driven by forces largely outside the control of this region. You'll also see that international trade sector accounts for lots of jobs and a lot of the economic productivity within this region. You're going to also see that the international trade sector accounts for traffic congestion, vehicle emissions, water and habitat, and other impacts. And then finally, you're going to see that while much is being done to reduce these impacts, there's still a lot to do. And with that, let's watch the video.
Industrialization and fast-paced development are continuing a 40-year expansion trend in the Asian sector of the Pacific Rim. In California, robust international trade continues to power the engine of the state's economy. Southern California's ports handle steady growth in goods movement. World trade generates about 320,000 jobs for California. In the Southland, trade affects 1 of every 7 jobs. Cargo is the lifeblood of the region. The ports form the heart, which pumps the supply of goods through the arteries of freeways, highways, and rail lines. Population and employment in California continue to increase, providing a growing demand for more consumer goods. Shifting manufacturing patterns indicate that future U.S. demand for Asian manufactured goods will increase exponentially. Already, Southern California's ports process 40% of the ocean-borne cargo bound for the United States.
In terms of the U.S., the trade shifted from the East Coast to the West Coast. And of course that made a lot of sense because of the tremendous growth of nations along our Pacific Rim, and we really are the entry ports, the 2 ports of the San Pedro Bay.
The figures that are cited is about 50% of the goods stay here, about 50% of the goods leave the region. It's nice to have these goods coming into the region, and if they're coming in through the port, it's clearly cheaper to get them here than if they're coming in through East Coast.
However, growth in population, employment, and trade places additional burdens on Southern California's fragile infrastructure. Residual effects include threats to the environment and quality of life. Congestion and air pollution pose the greatest problems. Community and environmental groups claim the ports and the trucks hauling containers exacerbate the already difficult living conditions in and around coastal cities and throughout the Southland. Taken to their logical conclusion, these claims might lead to restrictions on trade growth.
We're talking about tripling the growth. What are we doing to make sure that we do not increase the emissions that are being breathed by people here? The mayor of Los Angeles, my brother, has declared that there will be no net increase in emissions as a result of port growth. So that's a pretty tough mandate. That's a pretty tough promise. So we need to know what we're doing to make sure that we don't increase air pollution in this region.
Ultimately, the region is confronted with a difficult choice: restrict growth at the ports or accept growth and deal with the problems it creates. The choice to restrict growth could likely lead to negative economic consequences. Consumer prices will rise if shortages of vital goods occur and delivery costs increase. In the short term, Jobs may be lost from the California transportation and supply chain. Some business leaders suggest a downward spiral could occur, with businesses relocating outside of the area to avoid restrictions and higher costs. Trucking companies, warehouses, and ports located outside the region would be positioned to pick up any diverted cargo. As a result, these outside interests would stand to benefit financially.
In terms of sort of an economic benefit cost calculus, the benefits are diffused to a much larger area, and oftentimes the costs are localized to a well-defined area. And so in a place like Long Beach, and you can look at the pollution maps generated by the AQMD just as well as I can, you can see that we're probably bearing a much greater share of the air pollution that's associated with the transportation sector, simply because of the very nature of the way business is done.
The other choice, to accept growth, will definitely benefit the local economy. It will keep consumers supplied with the goods they demand at competitive prices. Concerns about congestion and pollution are legitimate and must be addressed. With planning and foresight, investment, and the introduction of new technologies, the environmental impact of greater port traffic and goods movement can be mitigated. Quality of life can be preserved and possibly even improved if all stakeholders contribute to the effort.
Just by the nature of goods movement, we do have impacts. But there's a lot of things that we can do to minimize those. Certainly there's no reason to have bad water quality as a result of the movement of vessels in and out. There's just no reason to have that, and I think it can be achieved. Same with air quality. Air quality is a little bit tougher because you still, even in the best case, if we can get down the emissions to the targets that we want right now, we're still going to have residual air quality emissions. So we have to grapple with just how much is acceptable. But we certainly have areas where we can reduce significantly, and that's our goal right now.
Port authorities, shipping companies, terminal operators, trucking companies, labor unions, rail operators, local politicians, community groups, warehouse operators, and retailers. All of these groups must contribute, all must cooperate, and all may be faced with some compromises. Indeed, success already has occurred in some areas. One example, over the last 30 years, better technology, regulations, and environmental consciousness have contributed to much cleaner water in and around harbor facilities. 2 studies show that water quality and the number of fish and marine life populating these locations has improved and increased substantially.
I think historically, too, the harbor has seen a lot of improvement. We can see that not only in our monitoring of the water quality, but also in the habitat here at the port. We find that eelgrass has grown up here in the port, which requires fairly transparent waters. And so we have eelgrass beds expanding. We have kelp beds in the harbor. Our lease turn site was number 2 in the state last year. We had over 900 nests, and so we see a lot of things, a lot of evidence that the harbor, water, and the habitat here is really doing well.
Other successes are beginning to occur in the reduction of diesel truck engine idling at marine terminals. New regulations impose fines on trucks that idle more than 30 minutes outside marine terminal gates. These regulations motivated marine terminal operators, trucking companies, steamship lines, and other industry stakeholders to form a working group under the leadership of the AQMD. The marine terminals and trucking industry have made significant improvements concerning truck delays outside marine terminal gates. An ongoing effort by Mattel to deliver goods to warehouses at alternative hours increased throughput and improved turnaround at the warehouses.
Now there's a lot more people talking to each other. And the Lowenthal bill, in conjunction with all the controversy over expanding the 710, has now really, I think, made people who are interested in moving freight understand that they need to get more actively involved. The community is more than happy to get actively involved to say, we don't want to expand the 710, or we're not happy with what's going on at the ports environmentally or with respect to safety or traffic congestion. And the shippers and receivers, not just the terminal companies and the trucking companies, but the shippers and receivers also have to get involved Even if they're not located in Long Beach or LA, if they're bringing goods through these ports, they need to be actively involved in these political decisions that are being made.
Regulations involving the use of alternative and special cleaner fuels for diesel trucks and yard equipment should reduce harmful diesel emissions. A move to cleaner alternative fuels for some yard equipment is already occurring. A concerted effort spearheaded by the Gateway Cities Council of Governments is replacing older, more polluting trucks manufactured before 1984 with newer, cleaner burning models built after 1993.
Basically buy a new one and scrap the old one. It's a great program. We're hoping they get more money. We're working with them to try and get more money into that program and keep it going. There's, I think, somewhat 6,000 odd trucks out there that are in that inventory that we like to take off the road and replace with newer, less polluting trucks.
It helps to keep the air clean. That's the main thing in this program, to helping to keep the air clean around. The benefits are less breakdown. If you don't break down, it's not jamming on the freeways. Better fuel mileage. It's saving a lot of fuel. It's hard to buy a fuel right now, especially for the owner-operators. You feel safe in this truck. Everything is working good. But thanks to the program, I got to pay just a small amount. The old truck was, you start out smoking like smoking men, old men.
More use of rail and the Alameda Corridor to send goods eastward from downtown Los Angeles reduces the number of trucks inside marine terminals and on freeways and roads. Continued investment and rebuilding the transfer facilities are key to this positive development. The introduction of new tracking devices and seals on containers will be required by the Federal Department of Homeland Security. Originally intended for enhancing the secure tracking of cargo, a side benefit will be the rapid, highly efficient movement of containers throughout the port via greater information automation.
I think it's really important to understand, too, that a strong economy and environment go hand in hand. I have visited, for instance, and traveled through Mexico with many of the ports there and talked to them about some of our programs, and their problem has always been that those are very lovely programs for you to have, but we just can't afford to do them. And so there is a very strong nexus between economic vitality and having progressive environmental programs. And I think that's where the U.S. is really strong.
The future of shipping may include converting to shoreside powering or cold ironing for ships that have been specially prepared. These ships would turn off diesel engines and plug into local power while docking and unloading containers. Retrofitting old ships and outfitting new ships with the appropriate equipment is required for this procedure.
I am optimistic about the future. We can have a port complex that between this complex and our airport, we account for a third of the trade in the country. You're going to have a port complex that continues to grow, and you're going to have communities that are not going to suffer their quality of life. I believe you can have both. I think we will have both. I think we're on the way to having both.
Community groups, politicians, municipalities, and other interested parties are justified in expressing their concerns about effects on quality of life. The best solution would include these groups working cooperatively with industry to embrace new technologies and new procedures. The goal for all stakeholders should be to join together to mitigate environmental impacts while preserving the jobs and economic prosperity that enhance the quality of life in Southern California.
Another great job by the Long Beach video crew. I'm sure you'll agree that the video has presented a clear and balanced summary of the problems we're going to address tonight. I want to say just a few words of sort of stage setting before I introduce the panel. I just want to repeat a little bit of what's in the video and expand a little bit upon it. The first issue is, or the first point, is that international trade is growing and will continue to do so. Within the international trade sector, the LA and Long Beach ports remain particularly attractive due to the quality of the facilities in the harbor here, the enormous and growing local market here, its strategic location with respect to Asian trade, and its connections with the national distribution network. Second point, growth in trade has proceeded faster than our efforts to manage it. One example is the problems on the highway system. There's obviously a lack of highway capacity in the sense that the growth in freight movement demand has increased faster than our ability either to increase capacity or to come up with or introduce more efficiency in the goods movement system. That has led to the problem of diesel emissions and especially particulate matter. And again, those emissions are increasing faster than we can introduce at this point technology and fuels to reduce those emissions. So despite the fact that some efforts have been made to address these problems, and you heard some very good examples in this video, it's clear that these efforts have not kept pace with the growth of the problem. Where do we go from here? Our panel and you, the audience, tonight will begin the dialogue. And the dialogue is about what changes can be made to better manage the flow of goods in and out of the ports and lead to both environmental and economic benefits. What changes can be made to reduce port-related emissions while minimizing the imposition of added costs on truckers or final consumers? As said in the video, we all must work together to find appropriate and feasible solutions. And that's our job tonight, and I'd like to begin. Therefore, I'd like to ask Richard Hollingsworth to come up and take over the podium for the rest of the evening or till our final remarks. And also would the entire panel please come up at this time. Richard Hollingsworth is going to be the moderator of the panel, and he's going to introduce the panel to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And while the panel is getting seated, I would again direct your attention to page 2 of the program, and I would ask you to look carefully at the questions and answer guidelines. And I'm going to adhere very closely to these question and answer guidelines, and they're pretty straightforward. Each questioner from the floor will have 1 minute to ask their question. And they can state their name and affiliation and the panelist to whom the question is addressed. If they don't state to whom the question is addressed, I will then address the question to a panelist that I deem is the most appropriate person. The panelist may defer the question if they wish. At the end of the response from the panelist, one other panel member may make a comment on that question, and then we'll turn again to the floor for the next question. We will begin the process by me asking, after I introduce the panel to you, I will ask each of the panelists a question. When I've gone through one round of questions, we will then turn it over to the floor, and I know that many of you have many questions you would like to ask our august panel, so I will start the ball rolling. First of all, let me introduce the panel. First of all, directly on my left, we have Assembly Member Alan Lowenthal. And beside Assemblymember Lowenthal, we have Vice Mayor Frank Colonna. And now I'm happy to reach. We have Stephanie Williams, Vice President of the California Trucking Association. We have Julie Masters, who is Staff Attorney with the National Resources Defense Council. Thomas Warren, who is a board member of the Los Angeles Harbor Commission and former President of the Longshore Union, Local 63. I'm working off memory here. And finally, at the end, we have Doug Tilden, who was President and Chief Executive Officer of Marine Terminals. So please welcome our panel. And as a reminder to our panel, I will ask you to limit your responses to 3 minutes. And this way we can cycle through a lot of questions, we hope, before we reach the witching hour of 8:15. And the first question to Assemblymember Lowenthal is, what role can public policy and government play in addressing the challenges of ensuring a healthy quality of life while encouraging international trade?
Thank you, Richard. Hopefully a good role, sometimes not such a good role, as we've seen in some of the unintended consequences as we look over some of the issues about energy and other issues. But I believe that, as the video indicated, we really are on the verge of really moving forward and doing things in Southern California that have not been done anywhere else on the planet, and that is to really have a vibrant international economy and at the same time to have an environment that is sustainable and one in which enhances the quality of life of people that live in this district. And that's in this area. And that's a difficult thing to bring both of these together. I think as role in the legislature, the role of public policy, what good, to me, policy is to look at the disparate issues and the disparate groups, to try to bring people together, to try to frame the questions in such a way so to move the dialogue forward. And many times, I think many of the solutions that really do not come out at a policy level do not need to come out of the legislature. Sometimes the legislature, we need policies after listening to groups, and I'll be more specific in just a second. Sometimes it's to be a nudge to move the process forward. I don't think that policy comes from a high down to the people. I think really what we see is having forums like this, listening to people, trying to find out ways in which by the legislature bringing its resources, the states bringing its resources to bear, we can formulate solutions that really enhance both, in this case, both environmental issues and also economic development of this region. I was thinking maybe as, and I also say as a community psychologist who taught many years at Cal State Long Beach, I think the best policies are ones that do come from the bottom up and do really reflect the interests of the people that are most affected by it. Specifically about policy, sometimes you introduce policy after listening for many years and saying the time now is to move this forward. I introduced a series of bills this past year called the California Ports Community Partnership Legislative Package. That was a series of 3 bills, AB 2041, AB 2042, and AB 2043. We'll talk probably more about it, or I'll ask questions about that later on. All 3 of these bills did not really come from me. Came from years of listening to people saying, you know, it's about time we did this. Why does it take so long to do this? Why aren't we moving forward? And in many ways, I think the role of policy is not so much to create the solution, but to hope that the people who are best in implementing it and doing the solution come to that conclusion themselves and create the policies themselves. And if not, that in order to ensure the public good, the legislature also will help to ensure those. And I think that's really what happened here, or what's happening is that I have introduced legislation, not new, but certainly one in which I'm asking people that this legislation much of it will go away, but it's really up to the people themselves to solve these problems, because these are no longer problems that we can hide from.
Thank you. Anybody like to make a comment on that? Okay, we'll move on to the next question, which is to Vice Mayor Colonna. Frank, how long will it take to expand or build the proposed freeway extensions through the affected communities? And we're talking here, of course, about the 710 freeway. And will neighbourhood residents accept housing relocation for freeway expansion?
Thank you, Richard. Well, first of all, we're hoping it doesn't take as long as the Century Freeway did. We're actually working very hard, especially with the local communities, and my council colleagues from Long Beach are here, that established a committee to advise the council and the Oversight Policy Committee for Gateway Cities on just exactly what the community wants to see us do in terms of dealing with this particular freeway. We are not going to be able to use hardscape and asphalt to solve all of our problems, and that's obvious. But in the meantime, we're hoping that from what we have been able to do so far, and actually through the work of a lot of good people, the community and elected officials, that this freeway is moving significantly faster than what's happened in the past, clearly because we have taken the initiative of bringing in the public and what they would like to see us do. Within the next few months, we're going to be looking at a hybrid plan. I have to admit that in the very beginning, based just on the standards that were handed to us, especially with Gateway Cities and the Oversight Policy Committee and all of the people that were involved at the very beginning, it got off to a rocky start because we were compelled by federal and state rules to deal with the worst and the best situations. The worst was a no-build situation that we knew wasn't going to work, but we had to discuss those issues as well as the best. And in some cases, it turned out to be like trying to build a new New Jersey Turnpike in one of the most heavily urbanized areas in the state of California. But we all recognize that the Interstate 710 is the most dangerous freeway, if not in California, the entire United States. It was designed in the mid-1950s to deal not anywhere near the volume of what we're dealing with today. It appears that if we stay on track and if the planets line up, the transportation bill gets adopted at the federal level, that we're hoping that we'll see some noticeable improvements within, with our fingers crossed, the next 7 to 10 years. What does that mean for us now? And that's going to be the big challenge, and that's where we're working in concert, the Alameda Corridor, Gateway Cities, with a council member, assembly member. We were council members at one time, with Assemblymember Lowenthal, and a lot of other electeds to deal with what's in front of us today. How are we going to move 30, 40, 50,000 containers up and down a freeway? What should be the role of the Alameda Corridor Transportation Authority? We're running about 35 to 40 trains in the corridor now. Each train carries about 250 containers. We can operate up to 140 trains in the trench, as we noticed, as the Alameda Corridor. We're playing come-from-behind football. We've got to stay focused on building a better 710. We have basically taken eminent domain off the table. We are not going to be taking homes. The first discussion was what was going to happen, and we knew clearly from the 101 Ventura experience that the community would not support that, and we who live in the community did not want to support that, especially with our housing crisis in Southern California. So we've got our sleeves rolled up. We just started looking at some initiated plans. The community looks very receptive in terms of what our accomplishments are, and we're looking to move to the next part of this whole matrix, and that's the environmental side of dealing with a better 710, dedicated truckway, truck lanes, the possibility for perhaps an express rail sometime in the future. But I just must share with you now the responsibility is upon us to make sure that what we do is we listen to the public, we try to work together to design something that's not just going to be good for when the ribbon is cut, but for 25 and 50 years beyond that. So we've got a big responsibility, but I'm hoping that in the end, we're probably looking at about a 10 to 12-year process.
Thanks, Frank. Okay, Stephanie, I have a really easy question for you. Will the industry regulate itself and use more environmentally emission-safe trucks?
No.
I told you.
It's not possible. That's like asking the residents of Long Beach to buy a Mercedes-Benz on the current income that they have. The banks won't let them. I mean, we have to be able to qualify to buy new trucks. And to be able to qualify for a new truck, we have to show demonstrated income on our tax forms, and that income's just not there. So if we're looking at moving from a unregulated first-generation trucking industry at the ports into a new fifth-generation trucking industry at the ports, we're going to have to look at the compensation and the role the trucking industry plays in the interface on goods at the port.
Thank you. I'll turn now to Julie Masters with NRDC. Julie, what is the position of the NRDC in terms of maritime growth as a whole? Are you opposed to it at all levels, or are you opposed to it on any level?
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize if I have trouble speaking. I've been a little sick today. But I would start by saying that NRDC is not necessarily opposed to maritime growth on all levels, but rather our position has been that any port growth has to be smart growth. And what that means is that all of the air pollution, the water pollution, the public health impacts, the traffic impacts, and the aesthetic impacts of terminal operations have to be offset as ports expand. A perfect example of NRDC's position on this is our recent China shipping settlement. And as many of you know, we sued the Port of Los Angeles because they failed to study the environmental and public health impacts of building, constructing, and operating the China shipping terminal. And we won an injunction that stopped all construction and all operation at the terminal. And we and the community groups that we represented could have probably stopped the terminal from operating for a really long time, but instead we entered a settlement that will allow China shipping to open up the terminal, bring jobs and revenue to the region, and at the same time will also result in state-of-the-art technologies being implemented at the terminal that will greatly reduce pollution. And best of all, the Port of Los Angeles has said that even with all of these measures in place, it will still turn a considerable profit on the deal. So that settlement is representative of where our position is on growth, but I would add one very important point to that, and that is that it's essential that before the ports consider significantly expanding, and we know they plan to triple their operations by 2025, that they have to significantly clean up their current operations. Because as it stands right now, the harbor communities are really overwhelmed by pollution and by traffic. San Pedro, Wilmington, and Long Beach suffer from some of the highest cancer risks in the region. And because the ports have been unregulated for virtually unregulated for a very long time, they haven't been reducing the current impacts of their operations, and they really need to do that before they expand. And we think that a very important first step towards this is Assemblymember Lowenthal's no net increase bill, which, if it hopefully passes, would mean that if the Port of Long Beach, for example, wants to build a new mega terminal, it could do that, but it would first have to either completely eliminate the impacts from that new terminal, or more realistically, it would have to make up the difference by reducing pollution and impacts at other terminals, existing terminals. And we think that's really a model for future growth, but of course with the caveat that existing pollution really needs to be reduced from current levels before expansion happens. Because a cancer risk that is 1,500 or more times higher than what EPA considers to be significant, which is what is experienced now in the harbor communities, is really an unacceptable cost of trade.
Thank you. Can we, is there a comment from anybody else on the panel? No takers. Okay, before we go on to Mr. Warren, for those of you who are getting ready to ask questions in the audience, we also have cards out on the side So when we've finished with the question to Mr. Tilden, we'll immediately turn to the mics at both sides of the House. If you are feeling a little bashful and you don't want to actually stand up there at the mic and ask the questions, you can fill out the cards and pass them on down. Okay, Tommy, since longshore labour is the closest and most directly affected by the environmental issues in the harbour, how would the ILWU like to see operations of on-dock technology change to deal with the health and air quality challenges that are faced down there?
Thank you, Richard. What the LWU would like to see, and I see several of our members in the audience, is we want to see cleaner equipment. That's probably our number one thing. The inside and outside the terminals. AMP ships, which we've talked about, which is alternative marine power, which is the first one. It should be in place in China shipping within the next month or so. Bag houses on top of the stacks, so when they do start up after they have been cold ironed over the period of a couple days, those pollutants will be caught and not let out into the atmosphere. Yeah, alternative power sources, electric cars for the clerks in the yards, LNG equipment in the future. We are using now lower burning sulfur fuels. Our contract of the ILWU and PMA is dealing with this issue, and they're conducting some surveys at several different ports across the West Coast. We'd also like to see more on-dock rail. Like to see the rail movements where there's small movements in several terminals be consolidated into one and build full cars so they can take that many truck traffic off the road. Also, something near and dear to my heart is cleaner fuels and cleaner trucks, like the gentleman said in the movie here, newer trucks for the owner-operators. The owner-operators, most of us know the work down there are kind of like the bottom of the chain there. They get what's kind of left over, and they're having a heck of a time just with their rates being able to operate their trucks they are given. For them to be able to move up, and the Gateway Cities has a good program. Both ports, the LA and Long Beach, are both contributing to those significantly. Part of the settlement agreement with the NRDC, with the Port of LA, is contributing $10 million over the next 5 years towards this cleaner burning trucks. So we need to get those dirty trucks off the road because they're one of the major pollutants. If we can do that, and we can also get more and more ships as they're being built onto the alternative marine power program, then I see that a win for our membership down on the docks. So people are working in there, because when you're at those gates and you're checking cargo in and out of them, what I've done for 37 years, it gets pretty smoky, and those trucks are not clean burning by any means. They're one step above bunker fuel, I think, that's in them. So with all those factors put together, I look for that to be a better, healthy environment for our membership to work in the future.
Thank you. Any comment from the panel? Okay, I'll turn to Doug Tilden. Doug, it seems as if the ocean terminals are under siege to clean up their operations. Can you tell us what can be done in the long and short term to clean up the air in the port area?
Thanks, Richard. I don't know. I might quibble with you about the term under siege. I don't know if we're under siege. We certainly have a level of visibility that our industry has not been used to in the past. And I think one of the reasons for that is that we're the most visible convergence of all of the modes of transportation. It's the marine facilities where the vessels dock, where the trains pull in and out of, where we have on-dock rail, and where the trucks that we've been just talking about pick up and drop off their cargoes. So certainly we're the focal point, the most visible focal point of a lot of the environmental issues that are affecting the entire port area. In terms of what the terminals themselves are doing, in their operations, certainly my company and many of the other companies have taken positive steps to try and reduce some of the pollutants that are associated with the equipment that we operated. Our company operates combination of all aqueous, diesel, and particulate traps on all of our tractors. That's certainly been a positive program. We participated in the Carl Moyer Fund with the experimental propane tractors. As Julie mentioned, we just reached agreement on the the opening of Berth 100. Part of that program is part of the settlement where we've just placed an order for 53 propane tractors for that facility. In terms of terminal handling equipment, in the existing state of the art, there isn't a lot more we can do that's going to remove an enormous amount of pollutants from the air. The ports a long time ago have converted the gantry cranes from diesel power to electric power, which is the cleanest power we can have for the biggest and most visible piece of equipment. The issues that we see certainly are the convergences of the different transportation modes on our terminals. And Julie, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the numbers that you've cited to me in some of our discussions have been the largest single source of mobile pollutants in the port area are the trucks that Tommy was just talking about.
I mean, yeah, ships, then trucks, and then yard equipment.
Yeah. So clearly there's things that we need to do relating to the ships and relating to the trucks. One of the things some of the things that terminals can do relating to the trucks is move them faster. The faster the trucks move, the less pollution is emitted into the atmosphere. And there definitely has been an improvement in truck turn time, measurable improvement over the last year. I think there's been a happy convergence of, the addition of 2 major facilities to this port complex. Certainly Assemblyman Lowenthal's legislation brought a lot of focus on this issue. It brought the industry together to address the issue for probably the first time I've seen the industry work together on a single common subject the way it has. And clearly we need to make better use of our facilities, extended hours and off-peak utilization of our facilities to get those trucks moving faster and moving outside the times of peak congestion and pollution is going to be an important solution to resolving some of these issues.
Thank you. Any comments from the rest of the panel? Stephanie.
I think it's important on the truck side. We're moving faster outside the gates, but we're not moving any faster inside the gates. And that's problematic for the legislation that was passed, because the idea was to have the trucks move through the system faster, not move through the front gate faster and the inside slower. So we still have a lot of work to do to get to the real intent of the bill, which is turn times.
Richard, if I could, I'd like to respond to that.
By all means.
I've certainly read that quite a bit in the paper. And just to satisfy myself before I came to this meeting, and I can't speak for all terminals. We operate in joint ventures with 3 major terminals in Southern California. We do probably 1.8 million containers in Southern California this year. But in every one of our facilities, I looked at the turn time within the terminal for the 6 months prior to the adoption of the Lowenthal legislation, the 6 months after. And across the board, every single terminal, the turn times within the terminals were down about 10%. And frankly, it would be suicidal for terminal operators to allow queues to move inside the terminal, because the most expensive asset we have to move is the ship. And if we clog up the terminals with street trucks, the ship's not going to move, which is the most expensive thing and the thing that we need to move the fastest is the vessel. So empirically, and I'd be happy to share that data with you, at least for our facilities, that's not correct. Our trucks are not spending a longer time. We measure our turn time automatically, and it's measured from gate in to gate out. The issue that wasn't being measured prior to the adoption of Mr. Lowenthal's legislation was a time outside the gate, and there definitely were problems outside the gate. But both have improved since July of last year.
I'm going to allow Stephanie one more comment, and then we'll move to questions from the audience.
I think the trucking industry would agree that your terminal is one of the best, but there are those out there that aren't. And we feel that we have to move forward to identify who those people are and let the communities know, because we're stuck in terminals at both Oakland and in the South area, and we're missing appointments, because if you have 4 appointments in a day and you miss your first appointment because you're 3 hours, you hit your first appointment, you get there on time, then you're 3 hours in a terminal, so you've missed your second 2 appointments. So it means the fines levied on the terminals are no longer in place because we didn't show up on time because we were stuck in a different terminal. So that wasn't the intent, and we really need to move forward with the real intent of the bill and make sure that turn times are public information. And I think the way, rather than the trucking industry saying we're stuck for 3 hours, and the marine terminal is saying, no, you're not, we have half-hour turn times, If we could have them stamp what time we get to the front of the gate and stamp what time we get out of the gate, then there wouldn't be any controversy because we'd have a metric. And that metric could help us as an industry and the marine terminals as an industry come closer together on consensus.
Okay, thank you. Okay, now, let's turn to the audience because we're really here to hear what your questions are. So I have an empty mic over here. Do I have a question on this side?
This is our commitment, ladies and gentlemen, as residents of a frontline community, that this increase will not take place.
Excuse me,
and the question is...
Thank you.
Yeah, right. The question is, how will we achieve this consensus? Because our commitment is that every day we will work these issues until somehow consensus arrives. So I would start with Assemblyman Lowenthal, since it's his response, and anybody else who would like to pick up on it, I'd appreciate that too. Thank you.
Alan, take it away.
Can you repeat the question?
Noel, can you repeat the question, please?
That you'd like me to answer?
Your sentence reads, our ability to accommodate an increase in the movement of goods cannot and will not take place without the consensus of the stakeholders. Amen. How will we achieve that consensus?
Well, I guess there are a lot of ways. I can just tell you through the legislative way, which is interesting. After, maybe this is a little bit of a long-winded response, but after we had successfully brought together a number of both community groups and industry folks, and we had passed 2650, I was invited to be the keynote speaker. It was almost a year ago by the PMSA, the Ports of Long Beach, Ports of Los Angeles, to talk about extended gate hours. And they were going to talk about what they were going to be doing in terms of what were some of the impediments and how it could work and why it wasn't and how long they've been talking about it. And I listened and I listened and I saw models of how it could work, and everyone agreed that it was a great idea, whose idea had come. There were some problems they kept talking about, and I listened. And at the end, I said, you know, I will work with all the stakeholders, and I will pull and work with all of you. I will listen to the consent, to coming up with a solution, and the best solutions come from the people themselves. However, you reach a point where you say enough is enough because you've heard that consensus, and you say that if you do not do it, if you do not come up with your own solution, then there will be legislation because that is the will of the consensus, because that's what's happened and it just hasn't been implemented. And so I told them then almost a year ago that I would be introducing legislation. They went back, all the stakeholders met, they came back. 6 months later, I held another hearing to say, well, where are you? And they said, we're almost there, we're almost there. And I said, guess what, so am I. And I'm almost there too. And I don't want to introduce legislation, but there is a consensus out there. You know what the solution is. You must come up with a solution, but if you don't, we can no longer tolerate an intolerable situation, and I'm going to introduce legislation.
Thank you. Do any panel members want to respond? You'll have 1 minute. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to go to this side of the House. Please identify yourself.
My name is David Beeman, and I'm the Health Benefits Officer for Local 13. I'd like to address this to the entire panel because I don't think it's a question that one individual can answer. All of us are aware of what Alan's talking about in terms of legislation, consensus, studies, programs. In all honesty, to be quite blunt, I'm sick and tired of hearing it. What we're looking for is specific answers, specific timelines to address the issue that we deal with on the docks on a daily basis, which is the pollution. In the old days, our members used to work in open hatches with asbestos, pumped into the hatch. They never had respirators. They never even had the ability to wear a dust mask. Now we've got retired members who are dying on a regular basis because of asbestosis. What resolution do these folks have? They have none. No one's responsible for it. I don't want to think that in 30 years when I'm retired that I'm going to wake up one morning and I'm going to find out I have lung cancer because of the materials that I've been breathing down here. I'd like to know that that's not part of my future. And I'd like to know that there is some proactive stance being taken on the part of people to assure our members and all of the members in these communities that they're not going to be faced with being the asbestos children of the future.
Actually, I'm going to... Since it would take too long for everybody to answer that, I have a volunteer, and Stephanie.
I'd like to address that one. We met as our board. We have 108 board members, and our Environmental Policy Committee came up with a plan to handle diesel pollution statewide, which we're going to seek an author for in the state legislature. And this is the first time we've been able to talk about this because the board just recently approved it last week. But we want, there's 5 generations out there of diesel engines, and I'm going to make this simple because the math is important, but I'm going to turn it into money because it's easier to understand. Diesel PM is measured in grams per horsepower hour, and before 1988, we didn't have any pollution controls for PM, so they're unregulated, and the pollution was equal to $1, 1 gram per brake horsepower hour, $1. Then they moved forward in 88, and they controlled it at 60 cents. So from 91, pre-91 to 88, it was 60 cents of pollution. Then they moved forward again and controlled it to a quarter up till pre-94. And today, since 94, the engine standards are a dime. They're 10.10 brake horsepower hour. In 2007, the engine standards are going to be a penny, 0.01. Those are the Clinton administration emission standards that are moving forward. So our problem is we have a lot of trucks on the road that are 94 and newer, which are the cleanest technology you can buy today from, that's the current standard. We need to get generation 1, 2, 3, and 4 upgraded to generation 5, which is today's standard. And the only way to do that, unfortunately, is to legislate it. And that is hard on companies because one, you need to be able to have the money to upgrade, retrofit, or purchase a new vehicle. So our plan is to pass a law that says in the year 2009, no diesel truck in the state of California will be registered that doesn't meet the 94 standard, which is the current standard today. And then that's our plan.
Thank you, Stephanie. Tommy, I know you have a comment on that.
Yes, I do, and it is on the trucks. When I first came on the waterfront, almost every trucker was a Teamster, a union truck driver who worked for a company. Today, about 80 or 90% of the trucks that come into the harbor are owner-operator, and they're so-called owner-operators, I guess, because they're supposed to own the truck, but I doubt if very few of them do. And they're given the worst equipment there is, bottom line. And that worst equipment runs in the harbor continually. Some of these drivers make 2, 3, 4, 5 trips a day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week. And they get to the gates, they can't shut their engines off because their batteries won't start. They're putting together with chewing gum and spit. And those are the people that we need to get the new trucks for. And that's part of the problem. Yeah, definitely the ships put out the emissions. They've always put out the emissions. But the trucks that were running in the harbor prior to 1980 were cleaner, safer, and well-maintained vehicles. Today they are not. And we are the ones who work down there who have to take the brunt of this sitting, especially the clerks who work at the gates are constantly involved in the pollution that these trucks put out. Until those truckers are given a decent wage and they can make a living and afford better vehicles, this is not going to happen. And it may take a raise in the cost of doing business, and it may take a raise in the cost of moving goods. But tell you what, goods move a lot cheaper today per ton than they did when I first came on the waterfront in 1967. They're cheaper today than they were 37 years ago. So the cost of doing business is going to have to go up to save our safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Tommy. Stephanie, I'm going to keep to our rule, one comment from the panel after a response, so I'm going to move to the floor again, over here on my left.
Okay, Paul Sanchez, Executive Board Member. ILW Local 13, LA Long Beach Harbors. China has an increasing trade deficit with us, okay? But they're practicing isolationism. In other words, we're letting a lot of foreign goods come into our harbors, but China is excluding us from their form of free trade, okay, quote unquote, under the WTO. What do you people plan to enforce or invoke a more equalized form of trade across the continents?
Well, we've no federal legislators here, and that's really a federal issue. I don't know if we've got any volunteers.
I got another question then.
Okay. Okay. Give us an easier one.
Okay, if that scares you too bad, I'll back off a little bit, all right? Okay. Councilman Lowenthal.
Yes.
This President administration has no problem pumping $86 billion into a foreign country. Okay, how can we get some of those funds right here in a local area, since we move more than a third of the nation's cargo? How come we can't draw upon federal funds to improve our highways, create clean terminals, create better air qualities, in other words, enhance the living area as well, move forward the industry here in Southern California, as well as the state of California up and down the West Coast in shipping?
Actually, I'm going to ask both
I can do that one if you want.
Vice Mayor Colonna and Assemblyman Lowenthal to answer the question because of the responsibilities that Frank has as the chairman of the Gateway Cities Council of Governments who are involved in strategic planning for transportation. But Alan, if you would go first.
I think that I think Frank should be the one that goes first on that.
Okay.
But I'll answer it. The reason being is that what you're really saying, what you're asking is, and it's a very good question, California has become, in many ways, a donor state. We contribute far more in terms of federal taxes we provide the goods and services in terms of goods for the nation. They come through ours, and yet we do not receive our fair share back from the federal government in terms of highway money. And so in doing that, you're saying, how are we organizing ourselves to fight that, to stand up and to do that? And I will tell you one way we're doing it at the state, but I think at the local level, the reason I said Frank should talk, is that probably even more pressure is going to be coming. But at the state level, what we're trying to do is to have a unified delegation, the California delegation. Historically, and I will tell you this, when I was on the city council of Long Beach, we had the base closure process going on, and we lost, as people remember, the Long Beach Naval Shipyard, which was the most productive shipyard in the United States, was closed down. The reason in part that it was closed down, at least a large part that it was closed down, was that we did not have a unified California delegation that stood up and fought for that. We had the delegation in San Diego fighting against the delegation in Long Beach. And so what happened is you do not have, because this was at one time the land of we saw milk and honey and everything came to California in terms of when we were the land of aerospace, that people thought that resources were just going to naturally come. And so Republicans didn't work with Democrats. Southern Californians did not work with Northern Californians, and Central Valley folks never worked with either side. That has got to end. And so one of the things we're trying to do at the state level is to bring in our federal delegations to the state, Republicans and Democrats, and saying you've got to speak with one voice. California, which has approximately, 11% of the number of members of the House of Representatives, maybe less so in terms, obviously, in terms of the Senate. We need those 50-some-odd representatives to speak with one voice and to fight for California. They are not speaking with one voice. We do not have state priorities. And that's really, in many ways, why people, in part, hope that Governor Schwarzenegger was going to have more of an impact. And let's hope that he does, because we are not getting our share. We are trying at the state level to at least get our delegation to speak with one voice, and it has to speak with one voice, or else we will, if we fight among ourselves, we will all lose.
Thank you. I'll just comment a bit on what Alan is discussing, and as co-chair of the Oversight Policy Committee for the 710, It's very clear to us that getting federal funds coming to west of the Mississippi River is almost impossible. And the state of California has been, as we would say in the old days in school, short-sheeted on a lot of things. And transportation is a big one for us. We're playing come-from-behind football. I was listening to some of the earlier discussions, and I'm sure we'll have some more about it later. But we're doing everything we can. From what I have seen since I've been in office in 5.5 years, there are more agencies and organizations that have rolled up their sleeves and trying to get an answer and some solutions in front of everybody than we've ever done in the last 30 to 50 years, as I see it. We opened up the Alameda Corridor 2 years ago. Prior to that, there were at least 200 aggravated and congested intersections that were just railroad crossings at grade that were just getting a lot of people upset, costing a lot of indirect tax dollars, as we would say it, and creating enormous pollution. The unfortunate events that occurred a year and a half ago with the port and labor, where we had well over 100 vessels and hundreds of thousands of containers out at sea because we didn't have them disembarking and unloading, was a clear signal to the entire nation that the economy of the United States was being assessed $1 billion a day. But as Alan indicated, and some of our concerns is we need a unified California delegation that stands arm in arm and fights to get every tax dollar back. We are trying to build a $4 billion Interstate 710 freeway that could be state-of-the-art, and we're scratching to try to get $500 million just to get it started. And yet it's designated of national significance like the two ports, and yet we can't get ourselves started on this. It is a very frustrating process, and we all live here. So we want something better to happen.
Thank you. Stephanie, you want to say something very fast?
Right. I think we're going to have to look farther outside the box than just California. There are some very powerful lobbying entities in Washington that are going to be beyond just our state government. The railroads are there. They would benefit from this. The trucking industry, the American Trucking Association is there. These people are there every day lobbying this highway bill. The Waterfront Coalition, the retailers. We need to pull in the people that are nationally on the ground lobbying every day and get them on our side and show them the benefits.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to take one of the questions from the floor that came on a card. And this question is to Doug Tilden, and it has to do with traffic congestion. Why aren't there more hoot gate hours and after-hour gates open? Are all the shipping line companies going to cooperate and open gates?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, the gates are really driven by demand. There are a surprising number of hoot gates that are open at the terminals that we're involved in. All of them operate hoot gates. You know, but unfortunately, hoot gates really don't do a lot to improve the traffic situation or the pollution situation, because typically what happens is the trucks come between 5 and 6 o'clock in the morning. They pick the truck up, and then they hit the peak hour traffic when they go to the distribution centers. What is clearly needed is a shift of trade pattern to the second shift, the night shift. And frankly, we're not getting, as terminal operators and certainly carriers, are not getting a lot of support from the importers and the distribution centers for support of those gates. I was with a major carrier today. We were discussing this subject because it is very topical. They themselves had done a survey of their customers within the last 18 months and got an abysmal response as to the customers that were really interested in using second shift gates. A lot of the terminals have experimented with them. I believe the Merce terminal is doing it right now, and again, they're having not very good support of the gates. So as we've discussed previously with Assemblyman Lowenthal, we really need to bring all of the constituents to the table on this issue. I think the terminals are prepared to open at night. We're going to need to open at night to handle the traffic that is moving through our facilities. We understand the issues with the truck congestion on the streets. The only way we're going to do that is move more traffic to off hours, but we've got to find some way to get the utilization of those facilities to make it pay, make it work.
And I have lots of people want to talk on this one. This is Let's see. Julie, you haven't had a chance to say very much, so we'll give it to you this time.
I just wanted to add one point, and that is that we're concerned that all of these traffic solutions, which include expanded gate hours and also expanding the 710 freeway, aren't going to address air quality concerns at the same time. In fact, some of these, like expanding the freeway and longer gate hours, are actually going to enable more traffic and more trucks to be on the road with increased diesel exposure and increased pollution. And so we'd like to see more out-of-the-box kinds of thinking, like more on-dock rail and a greater use of the Alameda Corridor as the solution instead of these other measures, or at least a mixture.
Well, this is a very popular topic. Okay, I'll break my rule for this one. Tommy, I know you wanted to say something.
Yes, there is a Efficiency and Good Movements program started. It was started by City Councilwoman Janice Hahn and James Acevedo, who's a commissioner for the Port of L.A., and we met with a lot of the stakeholders. We've had 3 large meetings. Each meeting has gained more and more attendance. We've broke into smaller groups with the main stakeholders involved, the ports. We're inviting the terminal operators, by the way, and hoping they're going to come aboard because they're a major part of it, along with the trucking industry, the shippers, the receivers. All of those people play a big part, and we need to get a solution between all parties that can agree. And I'm going to disagree with Julie a little bit. It wouldn't be the first time. But if we are able to move cargo and keep it moving, the pollution will go down. If the truck's sitting there idling, it's going to pollute a lot more than if it's moving. So there's been movement towards a fee on the day shift, and it's very critical. This is something that's nobody had thought about probably 2 years ago, but there's a movement to probably put a possible fee on the day shift and make the nights free to get people to move over. They're not going to voluntarily move over. It's going to take something like that to be done by the stakeholders. If not, I'm sure Mr. Lowenthal and the state legislator are going to put something in that we'll have to abide by. So
I've already put it in.
We're hoping to do that on our own, and we're working very hard on it. And a year ago, I never thought we'd be this far, but it's coming along very well.
Okay, I'm going to ask Stephanie and then Frank to make their comments very quickly so we can move back to the audience.
I think that hoop gates are very important, and extending the hours are very important for a number of reasons, mostly air quality, because we are waiting in line for hours idling, and I agree with ILWU. When you move those trucks through faster, idling is unnecessary pollution. But what has not happened is hoop gates that are consistent, that are done in sequence with all the other terminals, and that have all the facilities open, the maintenance facility. We can't bring back empties. We can only do certain things. So the hoop gate experiences have been limited and part-time, I'll say, part-time.
Frank, the last word is yours.
I want to just very quickly comment. Efficiency of goods movements is absolutely critical for us here. What I don't think most people understand but take for granted is the fact that 40% of all the goods that come through the 2 ports are used in the Los Angeles region. So if we state unequivocally that these goods are not going to be coming through our 2 ports, they're going to make their way here some way, because the appetite is enormous and it's geometrically growing. So to discount the value of upgrading our substandard infrastructure, I think, will be harmful to all of us, because in effect, when we move product more efficiently, we all stand to gain, especially from the air quality issues, which are at the forefront of our problems right now.
Thank you. Okay, the gentleman on my right who's been very patient.
Thank you. My name is Alan Hose. I'm a Tier 2 member of the 710 Freeway. I'm also a homeowners president for Windward Village Mobile Home Park in the 7th District of Long Beach. First, I want to make a quick comment, and that is there's been a lot of talk about these so-called shareholders. The shareholders are really us, the people that live in the communities and breathe the air and do the traveling on these freeways. That's point one. My question is for Stephanie Williams. Why doesn't the international trucking industry charge by hour using the taxi cab concept? After all, the container is their passenger on their truck.
That would be wonderful if we could get away with that. Unfortunately, trucking is regulated by the Department of Transportation, and most of the interstate commerce is regulated by the Department of Transportation. So we can't just set a rule and expect people to abide by the rule. It would take federal legislation, and we've never been really successful at that from California, doing federal legislation. That said, there is a school of thought out there, my school of thought, that says that there's not a free market at the ports. There's a few people setting the rates that are not the trucking industry. Every other industry, we tell you what we're going to charge, $1.25 a mile, you take it or leave it. At the ports, they tell us what they're going to pay us, take it or leave it, and it doesn't include fuel surcharges. Our diesel prices are up 40 cents a gallon right now. We can't get fuel charges at the ports. Every other industry is passing through fuel charges. So we're in a situation where we're held hostage. It's truly a monopoly, and maybe re-regulation or some type of minimum compliance standards necessary, because right now we're being dictated what our rates should be, and that has nothing to do with our maintenance cost, the cost of our fuel, and that should worry the public.
Any comments from the rest of the panel? Alan.
Yeah. I think this gets back to maybe what Julie said. I think that it really is important to think outside of the box and to have, there is no one silver bullet that's going to solve all these problems, and we can't build our way out of it. We can't just have better business practices, yet all of those things are probably part of the solution. We can't, we're not using rail enough, as was pointed out. That's part of the solution. But I think at the end of the day, the issue, and I'm struck with a saying that goes through my mind, that for many years in California, what we did was and I was thinking about water quality, but it's also air quality, we used to just send everything down the LA River because we thought it would kind of go out into the ocean, and the solution to pollution was dilution. Well, the solution to pollution is prevention. Let's be honest. That's the solution to pollution. It's not dilution. It's not just some of these. Even though some of these are important steps along the way, it's prevention, and it's being accountable ourselves. And that's why I've also introduced this legislation, to make sure that we begin to measure and we understand that we set a standard and we're not going to go above that standard. And that's it. We're going to prevent increased pollution.
You've got 30 seconds, Frank.
Thank you. I just wanted to point out one of the programs as president of Gateway Cities that we're very proud of, and it was talked about in the video presentation, and that's our diesel emissions reduction program. We have just replaced 210 diesel trucks. These are scrapped and disposed of. They can never be reused again. But our objective is 6,000 vehicles. And how are we going to get there? That's the question.
Thank you. And I see a familiar face at the microphone on the left over here. Would you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Richard. Art Levine. I'm a professor of legal studies here at Long Beach State. And I'd just like to ask about the security situation. I mean, it's clear that the port is a national security asset, and we saw what happened with the strike a year and a half ago, and reference was made to $1 billion.
Off topic.
The question is the port safe?
That's really not the topic tonight. Is the environment and safety.
Okay. The question I really wanted to ask was answered about incentivizing receiving entities to accept off-hour, non-peak loading shipments, because they obviously aren't concerned with the problems that we're concerned with, and I think it was mentioned that there might be a higher rate for peak times.
Right.
Okay, thank you. So I think that question has been asked and answered. Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to my right here.
Good evening. My name is Jim Whelan.
I am an alumni of this wonderful institution and a longshoreman. Everything I hear up here is cost of this, cost of that. The federal government's bankrupt, the state's bankrupt, and we need this money. But somebody's got to sit here because the companies, and it's not throwing a brick at anybody in particular, because they all want to do the same thing. My degree's in business. They want to keep their costs down. Well, let's get the public to pay for it. Why don't you wheat tax every container? That way it's evenly spread, $10 a can, $20 a can, whatever it is. But before you do this, you have to have a specific plan in place, ready to go, cost estimates, freeway improvements, rail improvements, Alameda Corridor. Why the 47 or 103, it's got two numbers on it, freeway doesn't go all the way downtown, I don't know. But that would be one way of taking care of it right here where we got the problem and getting it done right away.
And your question is, so why don't we tax the containers coming in or charge a levy on the containers coming in to fund the infrastructure?
There'd be a lot of argument on how to pay that, and I can see a lot of people going through the roof, but that spread out would solve a lot of the problems.
And that's your question? Okay, I'm going to
direct
direct
my statement. And
do you want to
why
direct
can't
that
we
to
do
anybody
this?
in particular?
Anybody who wants to jump in.
Actually, I'm going to ask Alan, because he made mention of his legislation already.
Right. I think that, well, first of all, as somebody who's been battered and bruised through the budget crisis and process, you know to introduce a tax, you need a 2/3 vote out of the legislature, plus a signature by the governor. We are not getting a 2/3 vote out of the legislature to do taxes at this point. And so that's whether, no matter how worthy it is. So we're talking about then a fee possibly, and you're asking, what can we do a fee? And if you're doing a fee which may not need a 2/3, which does not need a 2/3 vote, there has to be a nexus between the fee and how the money is to be used specifically and there. And that's what we're trying to do with SB 2042, which really comes out of the working group and says that possibly we need to have a premium fee on containers that are shipped by truck during the daytime hours or and to have not to have that premium fee during the evening hours, and to use that money to enhance the system, to do better the system. And I'm hoping that will get passed, and that will be the first step towards what you're saying, and that we can really incentivize the process by which we can promote the movement of goods not during peak hours by providing incentives and using some kind of fee structure.
Okay, we have a comment from Tommy Warren.
Yes, thank you, Richard. What I see is if there's going to be a fee introduced, it needs to be nationwide. It should not disadvantage any ports. And if there's a fee just put on Southern California, it's going to disadvantage the Southern California ports where cargoes that are optional will start moving elsewhere. 50% of our cargoes now enter Southern California, leave via rail. The other 50% are basically trucked locally. We must go ahead and work, if we want to work on that. And then if we give it, the problem is as Alan said, that we're a donor state, basically. If we give it to Washington, D.C., what is going to be our return? 25, 30 cents on the dollar, probably. If there's been talk by some legislation that if the fees are collected, they stay in the area where they're collected. If we could do that, then we could start building funds and start filling our infrastructure. You know, the ports through the years have looked ahead and done a great job. The ports have been able to handle the volumes of cargo coming in, working with the steamship lines and the terminal operators and building the facilities needed. But once you leave the gates and you go outside, what has happened? The infrastructure has suffered. It's not kept up. And we're 20 years behind times now. If we were to start the 710 tomorrow, it would be outdated by the time we finished it in 2020. So if we're going to have fees, they need to stay in this area, and that's the only way I think you'd ever get anybody to really buy into that program.
Okay. Julie, I'll allow you. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, we definitely agree that a fee would be an excellent idea. We'd like to see it widespread so that it's a fee on all West Coast ports or on all ports in the nation. But we'd like to see the money also go towards air quality and other pollution prevention. There's certainly a direct correlation between increased number of containers and increased cargo throughput and increase pollution. And so there is the nexus, and we'd like to see that fee as well. So we support that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask a question that came on a card, and this is for Stephanie Williams. Part of the pollution problem is from older trucks that work in the ports. The trucks are old because the compensation is low for intermodal trucking, along with all of the inefficiencies. What are your suggestions to improve compensation so trucking companies and owner-operators can have sustainable long-term profitability? Would re-regulation be the answer?
We couldn't re-regulate because of the deregulations of federal law. What we could do and may do is ask the Department of Transportation for antitrust immunity so we can sit down and talk about these things openly, because right now trucking companies can't talk about rates and steamship lines can. So we need to have that little chat about rates and what is sustainable and what the trucks need to look like to be 5th generation and moving into 6th generation in 2007. And I think the Department of Transportation is the right place to go.
Thank you. Any comments from the panel? Then I will turn to my right here.
Good evening. My name is Bree Mayon. I'm a resident. I want to say that I really am grateful for and appreciate all of your collective efforts to address air quality and our health. One potential solution that has been discussed to that problem, and it is one of many, is LNG, which may or may not be a solution and may or may not be a credible offer from a port that has lobbied as recently as last October against cold ironing at the AQMD. I'll point out for the benefit of Los Angeles, that would be the Port of Long Beach. My question is that the subject of citing hundreds and thousands of times more LNG in a workplace on top of seismic hazards where truckers, longshoremen, and residents may be exposed to that has been the subject of 30 years of debate by the California legislature and Congress. And the California CPUC says that it has always had the benefit under Section 3 of the Natural Gas Code of protecting Californians' health and safety and raising those issues in an intrastate gas project. And this morning, FERC said that it occupies the field and California has no jurisdiction. Now, if that is true and if that prevails, it could also put local governments, port authorities, and many other decisions at risk that could affect health and safety, and ultimately, as a matter of policy, could drive the kinds of decisions you're making tonight and tie your hands. So my question to Alan Lowenthal, and realizing you're on the spot because local officials invited this, is what role do you think the California legislature and the California delegation and the governor of California should do in supporting or not supporting the California Public Utilities attempt to look after local health and safety in this matter? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I support the decision, or the initial decision by the California Public Utilities Commission, that they really had standing and that they should be the agency that has decision-making on LNG, and was very disappointed to hear that FERC has said that there is no standing by the state. I can tell you that there are 4 proposed LNG sites in California, from Long Beach to I guess up to Humboldt Bay, although now the Humboldt Bay site most likely will not go forward, that the governor has, in speaking with the governor about this, or the governor's staff about this, both California EPA and the Natural Resources Secretary are very concerned about the role that California plays over having siting decisions and will play, and there are discussions going on in terms of what role California can play on this that have already started.
Okay. I'm looking at a question on the left, please.
Yes, good evening. My name is Joe Nieves, and I'm president of Quickway Trucking Company. We operate here in Vernon. And my question is directed probably at the terminal operators. During the negotiations of AB 2650 a couple of years ago, Mr. Lowenthal had to take an amendment from the terminal operators in regards to an appointment system to try and gain consensus and get the 2650 through the legislature. The terminal operators control the appointment system, which means that they basically control the gates. Now, if they have a hoot gate, which is from 3 to 8 a.m., or a night gate that's starting at 6 o'clock, why do they not just schedule more appointments during the off-hour gates?
I'll obviously take that one. Right now the appointment's not a mandatory appointment system. The appointment system is available. As you know, if you utilize the appointments, we have an obligation to keep it. The fact that we have an appointment system does relieve us from some of the punitive provisions of Assemblyman Lowenthal's legislation. We're not using a appointment system at this point in time to try and force traffic into off-peak hours. I do have to tell you that subject's being discussed. It is a very contentious issue, particularly among the cargo interests. It'd be very easy for us as terminal operators to just set up appointments to move everybody, or move a certain percentage to the night shift. But we're part of a transportation chain, and that has implications downstream to the DCs and the importers. And I don't think that the industry is at the point yet where mandatory appointments can be used to drive behavior.
There's no second part of the question. Thanks. Anybody on the panel care to comment on that? Okay, I want to get as many questions in as we can. We have 15 minutes left of the open dialogue. On my right here, please.
Hi there, my name is Mario Volandi. I'm a student studying international trade. And as an intern and studying strategic management at the moment, I had a subjective question, but I'd like to have, of course, an objective answer. However, I'm not sure if it can exactly be answered, but it is, and my viewpoint's, something to be considered. I'll start it off saying, my viewpoint is that although the collective entity of a port may not necessarily have direct competitors, it does have implicit competition in regard to the quality of services and efficiency of capital and resources. With Los Angeles Long Beach as a major world port, I believe it must live up to certain standards of excellence and provide a mechanism for continuous process improvement. Although port operations and all the supplementary activities of the various parties provide a collective homogeneous service, best practices and long-term growth strategies of other major world ports should be considered as a vantage point for implementing programs that truly benefit the entire industry, labor, and community.
And your question is?
My question is, to what degree have best practices and case studies at other major world port facilities, example being Hamburg, Rotterdam, or Hong Kong, been considered in strategic planning from a 5 to 10 year period?
Do we have any volunteers on the panel?
There were 3 people, maybe possibly, that could provide an answer, and this I like to direct it at the environment.
We need one because there's other people who want to ask questions. So I'm going to
no problem.
I'm going to pick Tommy Warren.
I'll put on my other hat as a harbor commissioner now. The problems that we have in Los Angeles Long Beach are a little bit unique compared to a lot of the terminals, the rest of the ports in the world, because our cargo is through goods movements. You can talk about Singapore and Hong Kong as the number 1, number 2 ports in the world for volumes, but a lot of their cargoes arrive by vessel, leave by vessel. This cargo moves through. It stays here, gets on another form of transportation to get to its ultimate destination. I've just returned from Sydney, Melbourne, Wellington, Auckland, and in Sydney and Melbourne, they have the same problems we're having here throughout the world. You can talk about the European ports who went automated, but there's still problems in Europe. But the volumes of cargoes that we handle, 42% of all containerized cargoes that enter the United States enter right through these 2 ports. 42%. So we're the gateway to the United States from Asia. Asia is our major number 1 trading partner. They don't have that same volumes in Europe that they have to handle. And I think we do a heck of a good job for what we have done. I mean, through the time prior to the lockout, after the lockout, we moved tremendous amounts of volumes of cargo with our one hand tying behind our back. And it was done well with all entities of this industry working together. So to say that we're not doing a good job here moving cargo, the efficiency of cargo movement through the ports of Bell and Long Beach has been, the productivity has gained by hundreds of percent since the introduction of containerization. So we are doing our job.
Any comments from the panel?
I would just like to quickly comment that, in a sense, we're the consumer side of the supply chain. And as we all know, America consumes the majority of goods that are produced throughout, well, in the international marketplace. That matrix is not going to change. It's going to increase with the growth, especially of California. But best business practices point to more efficiency, and I think that's what we're here trying to resolve, whether it's diesel emissions reduction, whether it's putting more trains in the Alameda Corridor, whether it's building better infrastructure. All of these instruments are tuning up, but we're not playing the same song yet. And all the stakeholders are going to have to get together because the future is now. There's no time to wait.
Thank you. I'm going to turn on my left.
If there's anybody who hasn't asked the first question, I don't want to, be out of line. I can ask questions all night, as some of you know.
You can. So I've heard.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Well, first I'd like to comment, if you'd indulge me on this issue of efficiency. If you switch a lot of trucks to night shift, or if you widen the freeway so the trucks move more freely, that supposedly reduces emissions. But to get back to what Ms. Masters was trying to say, if you then double the throughput as a result of this ability to do these things, then the emissions go up because you enable more ship calls, more terminal activity, more trucks, more trains. It's not, there's a real confusing situation there. And if I could, to build on that, I'd like to know if anyone has a strategy for approaching the emissions from ships. Our study of port environmental impact reports, which are somewhat murky at best, gives us to understand that 50% of the emissions come from the ships while cruising and maneuvering, not counting hoteling. So that if you tomorrow could wave a magic wand and put every ship in the two harbors on AMP and eliminate all the emissions from terminal equipment and trucks, 50% of the emissions would remain as the ships enter and leave and maneuver to the docks. If that's the case, 10 years from now, when the throughput doubles, you're back to the unacceptable square one of today. And 10 years from then, when it's predicted to double again, you've doubled your emissions. Okay.
I'm going to ask you to stop it right there. I think everybody very clearly has the picture. We're going to try and get you an answer, but I've got 3 more people over here who would like to ask questions. So
that's my question.
Would anybody like to jump in? And I know it's impossible to give a quick answer, but to respond to the concerns raised.
Well, while it is claimed that control of ships are really controlled through federal standards, you do raise a good point, and you know that I am interested in that issue about really can we be looking at, while in California waters, using alternative fuels, using alternative diesel fuel, and right now what we're doing is following the Semidian who had introduced a bill last year really to deal with this issue, not necessarily for container ships, but really for cruise ships to look at that. And there's litigation now taking place about that, and we're going to see where that takes place. But I think Mr. Semidian will be reintroducing something similar to that bill. And the issue really is what alternative fuels can we do, especially while we're in California water, even though I do believe that much of the control, especially of ships, is really a federal issue. But you do raise an issue, and I think the state will be looking in the future more at that issue.
Okay. Since I'm the moderator, I can now change the rules. and I'm not allowing the panelists to make any comments at this point because I'd like to get the questions from the audience in. So we have 3 more people, and we're about 5 minutes, 4 more people, and we have about 5 minutes to get those questions in. So with your indulgence, panelists, we'll just get these folks an opportunity to ask their questions.
Hello, my name is David Villegas, and I'm a longshoreman. Before I was a longshoreman, I was a truck driver, and I just want to know, why is it that all these truckers, they're classified as owner-operators, where that's the real obstacle right there, is I don't know if everyone knows here, but owner-operator is a businessman, and the businessman just wants to work when it's most convenient for him. Now, if we force these guys to be employees, we can give them shifts, and I think that would be the solution to the congestion during the day, the long lines, because everything would be more coordinated. So, they're stuck right now with a bunch of red tape that doesn't allow them to form a union.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to get to a question because we're real short on time.
My question is, why are we letting the terminals dictate to the truckers what they're getting paid here now? They can't even afford their trucks.
Okay, thank you. Stephanie Williams.
You have a very good point, very good point. We need to do something about it. I think store-door rates are probably the biggest problem, because what's happening is the steamship lines are setting the rate for the trucker all the way through the process, bringing it from one country and delivering it to a store. I think that needs to be regulated or become illegal, because a steamship line would have no idea what our costs are and not know how to set our rate. So if that was taken out of the equation, I think we'd have a better chance at getting our rates up, so we could be more competitive with the Alameda Corridor, and more freight would move over to the rail.
Thank you. I'll take the next question.
Good evening. My name is Tom Planese. I'm with the Coalition for Clean Air. Given that technologies are available today that have been demonstrated successfully in the U.S. and around the world that address all 4 major sources of pollution at our ports, the ships, the trucks, the trains, and the yard equipment, and there are incentive mechanisms used around the world that have been demonstrated successfully, such as graduated harbor fees to clean up, to incentivize cleaner ships that come into our ports. All these technologies and incentive mechanisms could reduce asthma, cancer, and premature deaths in communities where these elements are supposed to be considered as business as usual. This is a question for Doug Tilden. Why haven't terminals committed to a timeline to address these 4 major sources? And what commitment can you make today to a timeline to address these issues?
Well, I wish I could answer that question for all the modes that we come in contact with, but unfortunately I can't. I can only answer it for the terminal business. And as I pointed out when I opened my remarks, we in fact have done a lot of the things that we can do to control our own equipment and emissions. There are movements afoot relating to the ships. As Julie pointed out, we just reached agreement with China Shipping. They have outfitted 4 ships for AMP. That will be the first AMP ships, as far as I know, anywhere in the world other than the U.S. Navy. To plug into commercial terminals, and China Shipping just announced yesterday they're going to do 7 more ships. So I certainly think there's some strong momentum in terms of the terminals and the ships. I really can't speak for the trucking industry other than to certainly voice my support for some of the comments that have been made earlier, that we really need to get the pre-98 and the other trucks that fall under the current state-of-the-art emission standards off our roads and out of our terminals if we can.
Thank you. I'll take our second last question.
Good evening. My name is Ray Gabelich. I see there's many concerns here tonight, but as a resident, I have a concern. I live in an area, near an area called Los Cerritos, and for those of you that aren't familiar with that, it lies between the 405 and the Del Amo Avenue Boulevard exit. And I was not able to attend the meeting where they displayed the increase of lanes on the 710 freeway, but I understand that they're proposing 2 additional truck lanes on each side of the 710. That causes me quite serious distress, because what I was told when I attended Congresswoman Melinda McDonald's meeting last week was that this will only be a short-term answer, because by the year 2015, all of those, if it was built tomorrow, all of those lanes we'd be realizing the same congestion then that we are experiencing today. So my question to you is, when is enough enough, and who gets to decide that?
Well, a very interesting question. Frank, I see you leaping towards the microphone.
Thank you. Well, that is a good question, Ray. And I have to tell you, though, that our objective here, and I mentioned it earlier, is the efficiency of goods movements is absolutely critical. The 710, as we know it now, the average speed rate during the high traffic hours are somewhere between 3 to 7 miles per hour. It does us no good to accept that as a level and continue to feel that that is going to be the solution. And additionally, there's a major constituency of commuters that want to return back to using the freeway and not be intimidated by trucks that are in the 2 lanes and perhaps more, and creating a significant amount of issues. We had a very good meeting with our California Highway Patrol representatives at one of our Oversight Policy Committee meetings, and the issue clearly is not only just enforcement, but education and the fact that we still have to create a better and safer roadway. It's inevitable. We've got our population growth, and I'm not sure anyone here is going to have the capability in our lifetime to put a lid on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, I really appreciate that, Frank, but what I'm hearing is, and if I, do I
no
understand?
second questions.
I'm sorry?
You get one question, and that's it. There's no two-part
okay.
questions. Thank
We'll take it up later.
You can grab them later. For those of you who submitted written questions, they will be summarized as part of a white paper on this issue that is being prepared by Cal State Long Beach and will be available later. And where possible, if we have identification, or we will answer these questions as part of the white paper. And now for the final question before we close the panel discussion.
Hello and good evening. My name is Andrew Yim, and I'm the Vice President of the International Business Association student chapter here on campus. And I couldn't help but notice a panel member just pointed out that there's a 140 train capacity down at the docks. And so he also mentioned that there's a 35 to 40 train usage. I was wondering what measures can be taken to correct this inefficiency.
Well, that's the Alameda Corridor.
Doug Children has his hand up.
Tom?
You know, unfortunately, we as an industry are victim of a major change in distribution patterns. The Alameda Corridor was designed during a period in time when the prevalent trend was to move containers intact, marine 40-foot containers, into the interior of the United States. That pattern has changed enormously. What many of the major importers have realized that there are economics in their distribution patterns, and particularly because of supply chain visibility, where importers know where the freight is all the time, to move distribution centers in closer to the port areas. And we've seen massive construction of distribution facilities close into the port areas, which has resulted in more container traffic on the road, where the containers go to those distribution facilities, get unloaded and repacked into 53-foot containers, and perhaps sent to different destinations. So there definitely are some improvements we can make in utilization of on-dock rail, but frankly, I think it would be naive to think that we're going to be able to affect the change in world trade patterns that has caused the current underutilization of the Alameda Corridor.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our stellar panel for their answers this evening. And I would like to invite Mr. Dominic Moretti, I should say Dr. Dominic Moretti, from the LWU to make our closing remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you've seen and heard, this evening's town hall meeting is an outgrowth of a long and growing debate that centers around the often heated issue of port expansion and its impact on the environment. Clearly, two polarized points of view have developed. Those opposing growth argue that poor air quality, traffic gridlock, visual and auditory blight are reasons enough to bridle port expansion. Others indicate that goods movement is the lifeblood of our global economy. The slightest variation or reduction in the flow of these products, they say, can cause economic havoc, impact the largest manufacturer, the smallest retailer, and ultimately the consumer. Expanding our ports while at the same time reducing diesel emissions, managing freeway gridlock, and ensuring quality of life in harbor communities presents our industry with some formidable challenges. One long-standing and persistent issue is improving and expanding port-related infrastructure. Our local container terminals are state-of-the-art, capable of moving cargo at breakneck speed. Unfortunately, once a container leaves the facility, it is pushed through a dilapidated and antiquated system of roads, freeways, and highways. The result? Traffic gridlock, added pollution, and unsafe driving conditions. The most impacted of our local arteries is the I-710 freeway. Approximately 34,000 trucks and 32,000 cars struggle daily to coexist on a ribbon of concrete that carries 15% of our nation's waterborne commerce, and the numbers keep climbing. Extensive transportation studies, lengthy meetings, community and industry engagement have done little to resolve the issues of improving and or expanding the I-710. Residents along the corridor believe freeway improvements will simply push more trucks through their neighborhoods. Fortunately, some progress is being made. Presently, a 6-part I-710 Corridor Safety Action Initiative is being recommended for endorsements by the I-710 Oversight Policy Committee. This plan will identify actions that can be used to reduce the level of incidents and accidents on the I-710. Education, enforcement, and truck maintenance are key components of this proposal. Engaging all interested parties in an open and constructive dialogue in an effort to work our terminals smarter while extending their boundaries and at the same time making our ports more people-friendly is yet another set of challenges facing our industry. To some degree, this cooperative effort is already influencing and changing industry work practices, encouraging the introduction of pollution-abating techniques, and putting a new face on the waterfront. Work practices on the waterfront are changing and will continue to change. Working smarter will minimize traffic congestion, improve air quality, and make our industry more efficient. An incentive program to encourage moving cargo during off-peak hours is presently being crafted by a creative and motivated committee sponsored by the Port of Los Angeles. Working smarter also includes expanding the use of on-dock rail facilities, developing inland ports, and creating near-dock container transfer facilities with the intent to reduce cargo dwell time on the docks and reduce local truck traffic. A trucker appointment system is an important part of the mix. In an effort to reduce diesel emissions from ships while in port, cargo vessels would plug into onshore electrical power. This practice would have a positive effect on the environment. Add to this the use of cleaner fuels in newer and upgraded dockside equipment and now over-the-road trucks. This combined practice brings us even closer to accomplishing our goal of improving air quality in our region. A long sought-after goal, and one finally being realized, will provide the public with greater waterfront access. The proposed San Pedro waterfront project will help make this dream a reality and change the face of the waterfront. A pedestrian corridor running along the harbor's main channel will provide visual and physical access to the waterfront and ultimately to 4 unique waterfront districts. Port expansion, balanced by a pristine community environment, is the economic and social thread that makes up the tightly woven fabric of our region. This balance will only be achieved by consensus, tempered with an unbiased and reasoned approach to problem solving. Neither the port or the community will prosper without the other. Both are justifiably concerned about their futures. Often, unreasonable expectations, fueled by emotions, or a disregard for reality confuses the issues and makes problem solving impossible. Clearly, developing common ground that will allow for continued port expansion while mitigating adverse environmental impacts remains our industry's most formidable challenge. Hopefully, this forum will lead to consensus building, resulting in a positive approach to solving industry and community problems and working towards a common goal of providing a greater good for the greatest number of people. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Dominic, very much. And, well, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our 6th annual town hall meeting, and I do realize that I'm standing between you and dinner or a beer or a cup of coffee outside. So I'm going to make it quick. What I would like you to do, and I remind you one more time, if you could please fill out this evaluation form. And do remember that if we don't get a form, you don't get a dirtbag ticket, and I'm sure you would like to have that. Now, while you're filling out the form, I have to take a few minutes and ask you to recognize the many volunteers that were involved in putting this event together. They are listed in your program. I would like to mention one person in particular, and that's Alex Traver, who worked here as who worked this event as a coordinator. So would you please join me and give a round of applause? I think Alex is sitting outside. I would also like to take this opportunity to recognize the sponsors of this event. And of course, we have the United States Department of Transportation and Caltrans, who provided funding through the Metrans Transportation Center. We received very generous sponsorships from the Port of Long Beach, and I have to say that I just noticed that Commissioner John Cahoon is here, whom I didn't recognize earlier. John, thank you for coming. The Port of Los Angeles provided a very generous contribution. So did the ILWU and the Pacific Maritime Association and the Gateway Cities Partnership. So thank you to those organizations. And before we conclude, I would like to recognize our panelists and our very apt facilitator with a little token of appreciation. What we have here in the back is a little frame, and Richard, if you could help me with this. We have a little frame for you where we recognize your contribution. And what it reads is in appreciation for your valued contribution to the 6th annual CITT Town Hall meeting. And would you please join me, ladies and gentlemen, to thank one more time our panelists. Would you hand it out? Yeah. Well, with this, I am concluding, and I do hope to see you back next year in spring for the 7th annual town hall meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, good night, and thank you again for coming.
Norman.